Gunstar Heroes is simply one of the finest old-school run-and-gun shooters ever made. Even all these years later, it's just as satisfying making your way through endless waves of enemies, whether it be toasting them with your flamethrowers or vaporizing them with your lasers. It's a perfect mix of action and variety, making it one of the landmark titles in the genre. As the player, you get to choose from one of two characters, either blue or red, and the aim is to acquire gems that are rewarded to you after defeating a boss at the end of each level. These two characters have distinctly different playstyles, mainly in the form of which weapon they wield, with red having what is known as free shot, which allows the player to shoot freely while on the move, whereas blue's fixed shot means he must remain motionless. Both guys are able to pick up a base weapon from 4 available types at the start of the game, which include a standard energy shot, a lightning shot that fires lasers straight through enemies, a chaser shot that homes in on the nearest enemy, and a flamethrower that deals good damage but is limited to close range. The frantic all-out action is complemented well with wonderfully colourful, bright and detailed visuals, with some particularly great looking effects that could well rank amongst the best the Sega Genesis has to offer. Besides some of the more generic looking grunts, stage backgrounds and foregrounds look superb, and the parallax scrolling effect is done very well. Some areas even have a nice pseudo 3D feel, as objects scale, rotate and change in size accordingly, while the animation is pulled off flawlessly, with no apparent issues with the frame rate and flow at which the game runs. With its fantastic varied gameplay, well-designed stages, entertaining boss battles, colourful graphics and catchy music, Gunstar Heroes is a true must-have. Comix Zone is one of the console's most unique games, and that's largely due to its distinctive graphical style that, much like its name suggests, is lifted straight out of the world of comics. As the player, you assume the role of Sketch, an artist who is struck by lightning whilst drawing and is then pulled into his creations on the page. When it comes to gameplay, it's basically a beat-em-up, with plenty of platforming elements sprinkled throughout each level. Sketch is equipped with many moves and has multiple variations of kicks, punches and throws, which are very useful against certain enemies and not as effective against others. As well as this, you have 3 open slots to carry items in. You can pick up a power-up, items, weapons and even Sketch's pet rat, which can electrocute enemies, find items and flip switches that Sketch can't get to. The game is full of puzzles, which are usually quite simple to solve, and with a narrator overseeing all of your actions, you'll often see dialogue pop up on the screen that may hint as to what you need to do next. When it comes to the game's visuals, this is where Comix Zone is in an entirely different league, since it revolves around our hero's comic book. Is designed to look just like one, and instead of merely side-scrolling your way through each level, you'll be forced to explore each panel at a time, defeat all the enemies and move on to the next one. Sketch will take hold of the actual panel border and leap across it, planting himself firmly in the next scene. Spectacular animations for not only Sketch, but for each enemy you come across, as well as the backgrounds that make up each strip. It's a real showcase for what the Genesis was capable of when in the hands of the right developers. So for any beat-em-up fans out there, Comix Zone is well worth tracking down and adding to your collection. The Genesis was well known for its abundance of shooters, may that be Gradius, R-Type or Darius, but when it comes to the most graphically impressive, Thunder Force 4 has to be the clear winner. Like most of its kind, it sees you jumping into a ship and tackling an ever-increasing amount of enemies as you make it through a huge variety of different levels. As you would expect, you've got an extensive selection of weapons to help you get the job done, from standard lasers to far more powerful options like rockets and special power-ups that even the playing field with a nigh-on relentless amount of enemies that can litter the screen at any one time. The boss battles, or the lack thereof in certain points, range from the relatively easy battles to the exceptionally long and dangerous encounters in which it takes plenty of reflex, skill and patience to get through. For those of you who are looking for more of a challenge, there's several difficulty settings to choose from, with the Maniac mode offering the most intense option. Here, literally everything is dialed up to 11 and you'll find yourself failing quite often, but if you stick with it, it soon becomes one of the most rewarding ways to play the game. Now when it comes to Thunder Force 4's visual makeup, it's easily one of the most graphically impressive games on the Genesis. The fast and furious nature of the game isn't offset by anything but detail upon detail thrown in on top for good measure. Each stage has a theme and a life all of its own, and there are countless instances of background movement as well as all of the action that comes at you from the foreground. One issue that persists throughout the game though is the several instances of slowdown when the action heats up, but thankfully it's nothing that hinders the gameplay and ends up being just a slight annoyance. Overall, when it comes to shooters on the Genesis, you'd be hard pressed finding a better example than Thunder Force 4. Castlevania Bloodlines is the only exclusive game in the series to appear on a Sega console, which all takes place in the early 1900s and revolves around two warriors known as John and Eric, who take it upon themselves to foil the plans of an evil vampire who's looking to resurrect Dracula. You get to choose from either of them, with John wielding a whip and Eric having a spear. Naturally though, both differ in playstyles, so giving each of them a go is a good idea to settle on one which suits you best. Now the adventure is comprised of 6 different stages, all set across various locations throughout Europe, from Germany to Italy and Greece, with each of the levels bringing something different to the table in terms of unique enemies and obstacles to overcome. To further help out in this short but difficult quest are the game's secondary weapons. These are obtained by breaking down rusty candles and can be used as an alternative to your already powerful weapon. In Bloodlines, 3 of them are available: the boomerang, the axe and holy water vials, which can help you out in a tight spot. Now as you can see, presentation is the name of the game, and although it doesn't look anywhere near as good as its Super Nintendo counterparts, it still manages to pull off effects that would seem to be more than what the Genesis was capable of. Castlevania has always been known for pushing the envelope, and Bloodlines keeps up this tradition, with its ability to pull off translucency, mirroring, parallax scrolling, cloud effects, transparency, and other graphical feats that push the system to its limit. Each stage is a vibrant and colourful affair, with an impressive amount of layers giving them plenty of depth, but what really stands out are the animations of each character and enemy, which are buttery smooth and lend a sense of elegance to each and every move you make. If you're a fan of retro platforming or just a Castlevania lover in general, you should really give this game a shot. Originally releasing in the arcades way back in 1994, Virtua Racing boasted incredible 3D visuals and realistic gameplay that brought the medium one step closer to real life. As was common at the time, the developers decided to port the game to the home market and produce a version for the Sega Genesis that wasn't exactly known for its capabilities when it came to 3D. In order to overcome the limitations of the hardware, AM2 included something known as the Sega Virtua Processor in each cartridge that was essentially an external graphics card which could help produce an experience as close to the arcade original as possible. As with many racing games, it's all split up into a variety of modes for the player to get stuck into. You've got free run, multiplayer or Virtua Racing mode, and the latter is what provides the bulk of the gameplay and sees you being pitted against 15 other drivers as you race across 3 separate courses. The most impressive aspect of the game though has to be the speed in which each race plays out. Although the frame rate isn't exactly fast and hovers around the 15 to 20 FPS mark, the gameplay still manages to portray a realistic sense of speed, and thankfully the controls are tight and responsive, allowing you to navigate each track with confidence. The visuals are beyond what anyone at the time thought possible on the Genesis, and deployed actual polygons. Although the number of them was quite limited for the amount drawn per second, the result was still something that nobody expected out of the home console. Sure, it's not as fast as its arcade counterpart, and many corners were cut in order to get it up and running, but it was still one hell of an achievement for the home console. Thankfully, if you're looking to play this one today, an updated version is widely available on various modern consoles, and it's just as enjoyable as it was all those years ago. The Sega Genesis was no stranger to solid shooters, many of which feature in this video, but when talking about graphically impressive games, it would be an absolute crime not to mention Ranger X. You assume the role of this ranger and are thrown into a special combat suit in order to fight the advances of a galactic empire who are hell-bent on taking over the planet for themselves. From the outset, you're equipped with a pulse rifle which can fire both ways, but soon come to acquire a huge range of weapons such as flamethrowers, mines, and eventually something known as the Falcon, which sticks to enemies and keeps attacking them until they're destroyed. Using these special weapons though comes at a price, as at the bottom right of the screen is a power bar that depletes when you use these weapons, so saving them for the right moment instead of wasting them is essential to make your way through some of the more challenging moments in the game, like the several boss battles scattered throughout each level. Now graphically, everything in this game is just so painstakingly detailed, from Ranger X himself to each and every enemy and boss you encounter. It's clear a lot of care went into the design of the game, and the fact that it doubles the usual color output of the Genesis thanks to some pretty inventive programming tricks. Each shot, explosion, background, and just about everything in the game looks gorgeous, especially the little details which are extremely common, such as the dust that kicks up when you blast off, or the leaves that scatter and fall in the background. It seems as if the developers ignored the technical limitations of the Genesis and just made what they wanted to, and somehow got away with it. All in all, Ranger X is definitely something worth seeking out and add into your collection. The Genesis played host to many platformers throughout its life, but one that would go on to become one of Sega's most cherished franchises has to be Echo the Dolphin. It's made up of hazard-filled underwater mazes for the player to navigate at dizzying speed, undoubtedly inspired by the likes of Sonic. The aim of the adventure is to rescue your missing pod after a devastating storm shook the oceans and misplaced many of your friends. And although there are some minor issues regarding the control and challenge of the game, to this day it still remains one of the most engaging and rewarding games on the Genesis. You have to navigate through 26 levels, fighting enemies and solving puzzles by taking advantage of Echo's unique abilities, such as manipulating objects or using your sonar to interact with other sea creatures to receive helpful clues regarding your quest. Now, as I mentioned earlier, control requires a lot of practice and finesse, but there's a really cool organic feel about it, mainly because of the physical actions required by the player mirror the actions of your dolphin. By tapping the face button, Echo will start to kick, and depending on the intensity of your presses, he'll quickly speed up. At these speeds, he can be very difficult to control, and this is where many people have issues with the game, but for me it was nothing that detracted from my overall enjoyment. Now, in terms of visuals, Echo the Dolphin is one of the console's most graphically impressive games, mainly due to just how well it pulls off the feeling of navigating the ocean's depths. Sure, there's no fancy effects that are present like the other games included in this video, but seeing yourself effortlessly glide through the water with Echo being animated in a surprisingly realistic way, and when you couple this with the outstanding designs of each enemy and background, what you have is one of the best looking games that the Genesis produced. When you think about the Genesis, one of the first games that'll come to mind is no doubt Sonic the Hedgehog. The series received many entries on the system, but when it comes to the most visually impressive, that crown has to go to Sonic 3D Blast. Leaving behind the side-scrolling nature of the early games, 3D Blast flipped the perspective into an isometric view, producing a pseudo 3D effect for all of the action to play out in. Obviously, with this change in mind, the gameplay was completely different to what fans had come to expect, and instead of focusing solely on speed, exploration was front and center and managed to play a much bigger part throughout the adventure. It's all divided into a series of zones that are made up of several levels that see you having to defeat enemies and turn them into small creatures known as flickies. Once you've captured them all, it's then time to exchange them for a passage out of the level and on to the next. Waiting for you at the end of each act is one of the many bosses that make up the game, with each of them providing a real challenge to overcome that breaks up the gameplay and presents a welcome change of pace to the usual exploring and collecting throughout the normal levels. Now, for a Genesis game, the graphics that make up 3D Blast are nothing short of incredible. Attempting 3D effects on a 2D console, but keeping true to what Sonic really is, worked out extremely well. Each character and enemy are represented by highly detailed sprites with plenty of frames of animation to help bring them to life. This is pushed further by the varied and lush backgrounds that give each level a distinct flavour to call its own, and to top it all off, there are several special stages that take advantage of a sort of Mode 7 style presentation that at the time was some of the best visuals on the system. Although it's not considered one of the best games in the series by any means, 3D Blast is still on a technical level one of the most impressive. Contra has long been one of my go-to series when it comes to side-scrolling shooters, and Hard Corps on the Genesis is no doubt one of the best entries the series has seen throughout its history. The alien Red Falcon threat is back, this time assisted by some nasty human defectors, and to combat them the elite Hard Corps is dispatched. Each of the 4 characters you can choose to play as all operate in different ways, in particular their type of weaponry, which promotes several styles of play. Each of them get the standard machine gun, but also a selection of other weapons that serve to mix up the gameplay in the form of lasers, explosives and homing missiles. This variety is what really sets Hard Corps apart from many of the other shooters on the system, and when combined with the several abilities you have such as slides and jumps, you have all of the ingredients for what is perhaps one of the best examples of the genre on the Genesis. Complementing the gameplay itself are several branching paths throughout each level that promotes multiple playthroughs, and with 6 different endings as well, there's plenty of reasons to jump back in once you've made your way to the end for the first time. Now, when it comes to visuals, this is where Contra Hard Corps truly excels. The amount of detail on each of the sprites in game is nothing short of incredible, with each and every special effect such as explosions and gunfire further hitting it home. It deploys various techniques to deliver some of the best eye candy on the Genesis, such as parallax scrolling for many of the backgrounds, giving each stage plenty of depth, as well as scaling and rotating sprites that give life to some of the more dangerous enemies, like the several bosses you'll encounter throughout the game. When it comes down to it, you'll be hard pressed to find a better side-scrolling shooter on the Genesis, both in terms of visuals and gameplay, so if you've never played it, there's never been a better time to try it than now. Phantasy Star 4 is one of the best, most complete and absorbing RPGs of all time. The game was a huge success when it hit the Genesis and more than proved that Sega's 16-bit powerhouse was more than capable of producing experiences on par with the likes of Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy. You take up the role of Chaz, a young hunter who's sent to investigate the mysterious appearance of several monsters and soon finds himself pulled into an adventure that spans the entire solar system. What really sets Phantasy Star 4 apart from others though is the fantastic cast of characters that leave a real mark on the story. All of them have interesting backgrounds, interact intensely with the plot, and most of their personal dramas is what really keep the player interested throughout the game. In terms of gameplay, it's not exactly as groundbreaking as the previous installments, but instead a natural progression of all the systems that define the series, like the space traveling, turn-based battles, and abilities being learned by leveling up. When it comes to graphics, Phantasy Star 4 can easily be considered one of the Genesis's best looking games. All the locations look great and there's a good deal of diversity in the backgrounds, enemies and NPCs you meet during the game. The designs themselves are pure Phantasy Star, with weird looking bio monsters and even stranger robots, with lots of high-tech environments sharing space with cozy little villages. But the real star of the show are the cutscenes that opted for a far more engaging approach to what players were used to at the time. In each cutscene, squares start showing up on the screen, telling the story through still images like in comics, while the dialogue is featured below. It may sound like a simple addition, but it really is a very inventive and effective storytelling mechanism, creating a whole new dimension to the game and making it much easier for players to relate with the story and its characters. Overall, Phantasy Star 4 isn't the most groundbreaking game in the series, but it does provide what is likely one of the greatest adventures on the Genesis to explore. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for watching the video. I'll catch you next time.